It's a pleasure to talk about the Canadian Pacific today. As you may or may not know, I'm Canadian. Is there anyone else here who is Canadian or has some Canadian background or has lived in Canada or knows anything about Canada? You visited once? Okay. All right. All right. So we need to start with a Canadian quiz to see if in fact you have any what your knowledge is like about Canada. So what comes after kindergarten?
Graduation.
Yeah. First grade. I think I heard first grade. Well, in Canada, it's grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, all the way through. So what's a 2-4? Anyone know? I'm sorry? Not a 2x4, just what's a 2-4? It's a case of beer. It's a case of beer. 24 bottles of beer. All right. And what's that word? TOQUE.
It's French.
Toque. What's a toque? It's a hat. It's a knit hat, but you have to have the little ball on top, the little pom-pom on top. Then it's a toque. Okay. All right. So now you know something about Canada. Here's a little bit more Canadians. You know, what does the world think we do? We play hockey. What Americans think we do? I think we're all like hippies, right? What we think we do. And then what we actually do.
That's where I knew it was too.
Those look like tubes. Okay. Yeah, that's a whole bunch of hosers. That's right. Now this is our border patrol. And don't laugh, we got almost 500,000 of these patrolling the southern border of Canada just to kind of keep, people out that shouldn't. Yeah, keep the Yankees out. So, all right, enough of that. So why Canadian Pacific? Why is that the railroad I'm interested in? This is a photograph that belonged to, I guess, my grandfather and then my father, and it passed it on to me. And this is, my grandfather was a boilermaker for the Canadian Pacific in Toronto. This is the Lambton Roundhouse where he worked. This is a new turntable that was installed in 1937. And that's the whole crew. So I took a video because it was such a small picture there. I wanted to just do a little bit more so I can kind of show you my grandfather in a little bit more detail here. Whoops, I wanted to pause that. It doesn't want to pause, does it? Oh, there it goes, it pauses, okay. Now it doesn't want to work at all. All right, well, there we go. So my grandfather is this person right there. So that's him. And James Baker is his name. And he was a boilermaker for most of his life at the Roundhouse there. And he did take me on a tour when I was, I don't know how old I was, less than 10 years old, I think. And
Was he mostly deaf?
was he deaf?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
What's allowed? It's a very loud
Oh,
location.
well, I don't recall that, but maybe he wore earplugs
Did
or,
he do all the talking?
I'm sorry?
Did he do all the talking or did he listen?
He passed away when I was kind of young, so I can't remember. I can't remember that for sure. But he may well have been hard of hearing at times. Yes, possibly. So when I saw the Texas Express, I thought, well, that's interesting. This logo of a locomotive. Can anybody tell me what that is? You're on the right track, but it's not.
Texas types, 310 types.
No. You got the right railroad, at least. It's Canadian Pacific. And the distinguishing feature on this locomotive is the pilot. It's a distinctive pilot. Those gray strips were actually stainless steel, polished. This is a Jubilee type, 444. They made F2A class. They made, I think, 5 of them. 3000 to 3004. And they were built, of course, as a 444 with 80-inch drivers. They were built for high-speed, short distance passenger service. And the story is that if you backed up this locomotive with more than about 5 or 6 cars, the main rods would bend. So they were not built for any kind of heavy service at all. But I thought that was interesting. In Texas, they have they picked out that logo. So these are some of my sources. And I brought this book with me. This was probably my main source for most of the photographs. Floyd Yates, the author, worked the hill, as did his father. His father was, I think, fireman, perhaps engineer. And Floyd spent most of his 40 years with the railroad, working out of Calgary. And he also worked the hill as a fireman most of the time. He may have worked also as an engineer as well, but most of his time was spent as firing steam locomotives. And then he also worked on diesels as well when they came in. Come on, let's see here. Some more sources. Nicholas Morant's Canadian Pacific book. I brought that if anybody wants to look at it. Beautiful book. Nicholas Morant was the official photographer of the Canadian Pacific. And so that was his job. I mean, what a great job. You just go around the railroad and take pictures all the time. And just show you a little bit on the back. I didn't scan this, but this was some of his photographic equipment he was using, you know, as he was traveling around. He and his wife lived in a caboose, and they just pulled the caboose around the railroad, and he would just set up his camera and take a bunch of pictures. Van Horn's Road was Cornelius Van Horn was kind of the main, I think, construction manager for the railroad. And I brought that book as well. I did not bring these. I used these mainly for historical background, not pictures so much. This book on the Kettle Valley Railway on the left here is really it's quite an interesting book. But it's not our topic for today, but it's the Kettle Valley, and the line to the east of that was essentially the second main line across the country.
Bridge is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of good pictures in that book as well. Okay, a little bit of background on the railroad before it was built, before we get into the actual talk about the big hill and the spiral tunnels and all of that. Canada became a country in 1867. The first prime minister was this guy, Sir John A. Macdonald. And at that time, Canada was much smaller than what it is today, just kind of like the United States, right? When it started off. So this was Canada back in 1867. There were 4 provinces: Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. And as you can tell, where the boundaries are is much smaller than the current boundaries of the provinces. British Columbia was a British colony on the West Coast. And it was not part of Canada at that time. Because of the geography of where British Columbia was located on the West Coast, much of their commerce, interaction with people, etc., business was with the United States, with Washington, Oregon, up and down the West Coast. The interior valleys went north and south, the Columbia River Valley, some others. So all of their kind of connection was to the United States. And back at this time, there was a real concern that British Columbia was going to join the United States. And so Macdonald decided, well, he didn't like that idea. And a lot of people who lived in British Columbia didn't like that idea either, but it was still a real concern, and there was a viable possibility that they might join the US. Yes, Matt.
I assume that British Columbia was still a British colony now?
Yes, it's still British. All of the rest of it was possessions. As you can, this is only a part of a map, but other British possessions are yellow. So, and this is, the full map, right? So anyway, British Columbia was, well, what Macdonald did was he promised that I will build you a railroad to connect you with the rest of the country if you join Canada. So in 1871, BC did join Canada. You can tell here that Manitoba was just this little bitty box at the bottom next to the border. And everything else was just the Northwest Territories. Newfoundland did not join Canada until 1949. And so that's kind of a bit of the background as to how the railroad was envisioned by MacDonald and others, of course, to unite the country, unite the continent from ocean to ocean. So we have two important people here, J.J. Hill, the empire builder, and Cornelius Van Horn. Can anyone tell me which one is Hill?
Cigar, got it right.
We got votes for both. Well, the one on the right is actually Hill. And the one on the left is Sir William Cornelius Van Horn. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Hill was born in Canada. He was born in Guelph, near Guelph, out in a farm. And he died 1916 in St. Paul, Minnesota. Van Horn was born in Illinois and he died in Montreal. Back in the early days of the railroad, the Canadian Pacific, Hill worked for them as one of the directors. And he was instrumental in recruiting Van Horn from the US to come up and manage the construction of the railroad, the transcontinental line. And there was a point when they had to decide where the line was going to go. Hill wanted to bring the line into the US through Chicago and then back into Canada, or either through Sault Ste. Marie or through the Detroit area. Van Horn, the American, wanted to keep the line all in Canada, north of Lake Superior. So they had a falling out over this, and Hill left the country, and he went to Minnesota. And kind of the rest is history, right? As far as his involvement with the Great Northern and all the other railroads he was involved with. But their animosity did not end there. And this is where the book by McCulloch on the Kettle Valley really kind of illustrates the conflict between these two guys, the competition, and really very acrimonious kind of interactions between the two as they manage their respective railroads, Canadian Pacific and Great Northern. So that's kind of all very interesting. So I don't think a lot of people realize that Hill was a Canadian who worked for Canadian Pacific and then moved to the States and became famous for the Great Northern and building his empire across the country. So eventually the line was finished in 1885. In November, late in the year. So nothing really happened as far as commercial traffic until 1886 when the snow melted. But this is a picture of the last spike. The person with the in the middle putting the last spike is Donald Smith. I forget his position right now, but he's kind of he was one of the main guys, obviously, for the railroad. The gentleman up here with the kind of the square white beard is Sir Sanford Fleming. And this is Van Horn right there. That's Cornelius Van Horn. Sir Sanford Fleming, can anyone tell me what he's famous for? Does that name ring a bell? These science types? He was the first person to come up with the idea of worldwide time zones, 24 time zones for the whole world. And he had a custom-made watch that would, and I was going to have a picture on here of what it looked like, but it was an interesting watch where you could tell the time in anywhere in the world, sort of a thing. And his idea of time zones really was important when it came to keeping trains on schedule. And that's really one of the original reasons why time zones were invented, was because before that time, every town had their own time. So but that's Sir Sanford Fleming, an engineer. This was the telegram that was sent by Van Horn to Prime Minister MacDonald. And it says, if you can't read it, it's from Craigalatchie, which is where the last spike was driven. Thanks to your far-seeing policy and unwavering support, the Canadian Pacific Railway is completed. The last rail was laid this Saturday morning at 9:22. So that's a copy of the telegram that was sent to him. Here's a profile of the railroad, just in the western section, of course. This is Calgary here. The big hill is right here, Kicking Horse Pass. That's the main topic for today's discussion. This is the Rogers Pass, which is a whole other interesting story in itself. And then over here is Revelstoke. Some of you watch the cameras from Revelstoke. So this is just a profile of the western part of the line through the mountains. Two major mountain ranges, the Rockies and the Selkirks. This is a copy of the handout that you have. Does everybody have a handout? Make sure you have one. I need to get a copy so I can refer to it. One of the things I just want to draw your attention to is that in the map on the bottom, which is a close-up of the line, the original line and the new alignment through the spiral tunnel. So the dotted line, let's see, the dotted line was the Big Hill route, and the solid line is the present line through the spiral tunnels. And you'll notice that for part of the route, the dashed line, the Trans-Canada Highway actually follows the same right-of-way from Wapta, which is on the right-hand side, Wapta Lake, all the way down to approximately Yoho, which is halfway down, and then they diverge at that point. So if you're driving the Trans-Canada Highway through the Kicking Horse Pass, you'll be traveling on the old right-of-way, which was a 4.5% grade. This is another source that I used. So in November 1883, construction was at Lake Louise, which you'll see on the top map towards the right-hand side. That's Lake Louise. It used to be called Lagan. Some of you may have been to Lake Louise. I've been there once. Beautiful spot. Banff is further east than this. But anyway, construction was up to Lake Louise at that time. And then from there, they had to figure out where to go. They had to climb to the Continental Divide, the summit, which is at Stephen, which you can see there, kind of in the middle of the map there, right on the border between Alberta and British Columbia at 5,300 feet. And then beyond this, the Kicking Horse Pass descended all the way down to Field, which is a major division point on the railroad. And they dropped 1,260 feet in 10 miles. And that was their challenge. What are we going to do? How are we going to get down this hill? So, and we'll get there in a minute, but you may be wondering, why is it called Kicking Horse Pass? Maybe not. There was an expedition in 1858 called the Palliser Expedition, which basically just looking, surveying the mountains, trying to figure out the best way to make their way through. Their physician on the expedition and also geologist was kicked in the chest by his horse and rendered unconscious for a while. And so then the rest of his crew decided, as they were marching their way down, doing their expedition, they thought, well, let's just call that Kicking Horse Pass. It's a good name. And the name has stuck right until today. Several routes were considered. The first route that they thought about was to, from Wapta Lake, the bottom map here, and this is not marked on here, but essentially follow the side of the mountain at a 2.2% grade, which was the maximum allowed, all the way down to a point where it would join the current main line, which was some distance west of Field. So it would have been that whole span would have been exposed to a lot of slides. It was a very steep, very rugged terrain. They decided not to do that. Van Horn argued with the government that a change in the charter should be allowed to change the maximum grade from 2.2 to 4.5 on a temporary basis to get the road finished and get it open as soon as possible. So the government said, okay, well, you can do that. We just need to have at least 3 safety switches because it's a steep grade, as you know. And so although it was an easier route to build, it was an operational burden, even a nightmare at times, requiring more locomotives and more trains, or shorter trains, more locomotives and shorter trains. Here's a picture of the construction just beginning at the top of the hill, going down. This is a picture of the first safety switch. You can see on the right-hand side where it diverges off up into the woods. And there's a shack there, a watchman's shack. Actually, it's called the switch tender. All of the safety switches were manned by a person 24 hours a day. And we'll get to their responsibilities in a minute. The main line obviously diverges to the left and then goes down the valley. Yes, Matt.
How long is this short section of 4.5%? How many miles or
I'm kind of guessing. I think it's around probably 8 miles or so. Yeah. This picture here, if you look at your map, and you'll see the Yoho Spur on the bottom map towards the left-hand side. You'll see Yoho Spur, and then you'll see safety switch number 3. There was some controversy actually about what this photo represents. And eventually somebody discovered the original drawings in the archives. And apparently this was originally safety switch number 3, but they decided to, replace it because of the kind of the reverse curve seen here, that it wasn't really it was more likely to derail the train on the safety spur rather than, keep it on the rails, especially at speed. So I'm going to read a little bit of this to you. Maybe you can read it too, but what the heck, I'll read it along. This was from the 1909 employees timetable for how to stay safe on the hill. And this is just a part of it. The regulations were really rather extensive. But one long whistle must be sounded at the whistle board located about 1,000 feet east of each safety switch. And provided the train is fully under control and not exceeding prescribed speed, which is 8 miles an hour for passenger and 6 miles an hour for freight, 4 short blasts must be sounded at the signboard showing the switch number as a signal for the switch to be thrown for the main line. So the normal position of a safety switch is for the spur. And an engineer must not whistle for a switch to be set for the main line unless the speed of his train is within the required limit and he is satisfied he can maintain it. Engineers must promptly report any case of a switch being turned for the main line before they signaled for it. So, okay, a lot of things to keep in mind. It's a special duty of every switch tender to closely observe the speed of an approaching train, and unless he is certain it conforms to the regulation, he must not set switch for main line. All caps, in original, thus requiring the train to take the safety spur or stop before reaching it. If a train is seen to be running faster for any cause than its prescribed speed, the electric gong must be sounded by pressing the button in the watch shack, which will be a signal to all switchmen and also the operator at field that a train is running too fast. Switchmen receiving such a signal will immediately station themselves at the switch and carry out instructions contained in these instructions. And obey the rules, be watchful, run no risks. Well, how do you think it all worked out? Well, well, the good news is that no paying passengers lost their lives on the hill. Okay, that's the good news. This poor locomotive, number 314. Okay, so it was involved in the first major mishap on the hill in 1889. So only like 3 years in or so, less than that. There was a rookie at the switch number 3. His name was Rafferty. As this train was coming down the hill, it made it past safety switch number 1, okay, number 2, okay. And somewhere between 2 and 3, the engineers started to lose control of his train. They tried to apply brakes, he did all this stuff. He lost control, he was running away. Now Rafferty, the rookie, thought, as he later testified, he thought he heard 4 whistles from the locomotive saying, you know, I'm under control. So he set the switch for the main, the train roars by, and unfortunately, of course, you know, piles up against a cliff of rocks. 2 of the crew members were killed, one instantly and one an hour or 2 later. The engineer survived, but he never worked the hill again. He went out to the prairies, you know, flat territory there. And other crew members were injured, but there were 2 fatalities. This locomotive, 314, was repaired, and a few years later, on 1895, while it was working as a pusher on the hill, she blew up. So, now, both crew members were killed, you know, during a boiler explosion. It's hard to survive that. So she was repaired again, the locomotive. I mean, I don't know how they did it. Basically, the thing was, I don't know what was left, a frame and wheels, I suppose. Anyway, they rebuilt it and served again on the line until it was scrapped in 1917. So if you ever stop at the viewpoint, you know, on the Trans-Canada Highway, there's a viewpoint where you can see the spiral tunnels. The dome, the steam dome of this locomotive is on display at that location. This is one of the pushers. This is an 080 locomotive that was used in pushing service.
Based on that picture, they use pushers for passenger trains as well.
Oh yeah, yep, for sure. Yep. Now, Canadian Pacific is typically known for rather attractive locomotives, and this is not one of them. This is an 0660 contraption that was used in as a pusher, of course, on the hill. This is a compound, I think, and I think they built 5 of these. They didn't really last very long in service. There were no, you know, pilot trucks, anything like that. They tended to derail. This one, I think, this particular locomotive was rebuilt into a decapod at some point later, 210. But I thought this was rather unique. You just didn't see really any articulated locomotives on the CPR. So this was one of the very few. So this is an 1898 picture coming up that same safety switch, number 1. So it's a passenger train. There's 1 baggage car. There's a locomotive, a baggage, a locomotive, 6 cars, and another locomotive. So, and probably crawling up the hill at maybe, you know, 5 or 6 miles an hour, something like that. And here's another example. This one has 1 extra car, 2 baggage cars, still has 3 locomotives. The one on the lead almost looks like a 10-wheeler, but it wasn't really identified in the caption. It's hard to tell, but this is, you know, this was operations on the big hill before the spiral tunnels were put into place. These are some a group of pushers up at the top at Hector, which is where the grade started to level out. You can see where Hector is. It's west of Stephen, basically next to Wapta Lake. There was a Y there. They would turn them, and the reason I included some of the captioning here was because they actually helped trains going down the hill. What it says in the caption is that, returning to field in pairs on freight or passenger trains, they will assist in braking by putting the engine in reverse and working steam, similar to dynamic braking. I hadn't heard of that before. Have you heard of that before? I'm not really a...
Heard that in Southern Pacific, they did that sometimes. So I didn't know how common it was.
Yeah. Yeah. They helped going up the hill and coming down the hill, so. Okay, so the temporary solution lasted 24 years. I think it was longer than what he anticipated. Nevertheless, they figured out that they had to do something, that this was not a long-term solution. One idea that they had was to build a tunnel from the west, just west of Lake Louise, to a site near Cathedral, which you can see on your map. But then they took soundings in Wapta Lake and found that it was 600 feet deep, which was deeper than where the tunnel was going to be. That was kind of a problem. So they decided to scrap that idea. Their senior engineer for Western Lines, someone by the name of John Schwitzer, was inspired by the spiral tunnels on the St. Gothard line in Switzerland. Thought, well, yeah, that seems like a good idea. That's what they do over there. So another engineer, Andrew McCulloch, became the chief engineer. He was also working on this line, but he became the chief engineer for the Kettle Valley Railway. So that's why his name shows up in that other book I showed you, McCulloch's Wonder. So they decided that, let's try spiral tunnels. So they built them. They started in 1907, finished 2 years later, $1.5 million. Here is some information about the lower tunnel specifically, how long it is, how sharp the curve is. I couldn't find any other data on the upper tunnel like I did on the lower one, but it is a longer one. And this is a cartoon from 1911 showing Schwitzer with his head coming out of one portal and his feet coming out of the other portals. The mastermind of the spiral tunnels. And here's a construction gang at the upper portal of the lower spiral tunnel, 1908. So they used narrow gauge locomotives during the construction of the spiral tunnels. This is a 3-foot gauge 260. I couldn't find very many pictures of the actual construction of the spiral tunnels, but this is one. After the tunnels were completed, these narrow gauge locomotives were shipped off, sold to various logging companies or other railroads that had an interest in them. And this is just a section of the topographic map for that area. It's basically showing the same thing, but a little more context with the surrounding mountains and such. Yeah.
Was the tunnel built by the railroad or by contract? People contracted to the railroad. You know?
They probably, I don't know for sure. I think they probably contracted out part of it, but I mean, obviously the railroad, I think, was intimately involved in the process. But that might be in Van Horn's book, some of the details in there, possibly. This is just another sort of a representation that I believe is probably from the viewpoint, since there is a little thing in the middle that says you are here, vous êtes ici. And so it just kind of shows you coming from the top right, from the east, upgrade downhill through the upper tunnel, back around to the lower tunnel, and then on to field. Kind of gives you a representation there. And this is a kind of an interesting enhanced photograph of the whole thing. And what's also interesting about this, I mean, you can see the upper tunnel, the lower tunnel over there, but here in the middle is the original grade, right? You can see that original grade winding up before the highway was put in. So it doesn't really say what year this picture was taken, I don't think. But it was taken from the Monarch mines, which I think I do have some pictures of the mines that are obviously on the side of this mountain here. And the railroad did serve the mines until it closed. So if I model that, that will be something I'll have to include, right? The mining spur. And by the way, that is my overall goal, is to build a HO model of the spiral tunnels in some fashion. At the bottom of the hill is Field, British Columbia, and this is a picture of, part of the yard, the turntable, etc. Some of the facilities there. I'm going to talk a little bit about the locomotives used on the hill. This is a T1A, 210-4 on a 100-foot table there. And by the way, I didn't have time to do this, but maybe I can do it later. But I brought 4 locomotives of 4 model locomotives that are used on the hill. So maybe afterwards, if anybody wants to hang around and just look, I have a model of one of these, which is a T1A, and then some other ones as well. So we don't want to take time to do this now, but if you want to take them out, you can, and just sort of feel free to do that. Do you know what the Canadian Pacific called their 210-4s? Yes. Selkirks. Very good. Yep. Do you know what they called their 210-2s? Santa Fe's. So I have a model of the 210-2 and 2 types of the 210-4s with me, as well as a Mikado. 1952, this was taken close to around the time I was born, and transition time with a 210-2 helping, or the new diesel locomotives. This was taken also in Field. This is in Field, 1946, preparing to head up the hill, triple header. So triple headers were fairly typical going up the hill. And almost always on the head end, especially for passenger trains. They're all on the head end. So and this was, again, the picture was taken by Floyd Yates, the guy who was I think he was anyway, he was firing one of these locomotives, I think the lead locomotive. On this particular day, yeah, I was firing number 5929, the head one, for Smokey Dietz, and needless to say, his request didn't hurt my feelings a bit. If you're the head locomotive had brought the train into Field, right? And they had 2 helpers. So he requested or demanded that the helpers be put behind his locomotive when they go through, because of when they go through the tunnels, they're going to be smoked out, right? So and so he was fine with that. And they could only do that really in the summer, because on passenger trains, because the head locomotive provided steam heat, and so they couldn't do it the other way around in the wintertime. So sometimes, it says here, sometimes in the summer, as many as 5 passenger trains would climb the hill during a 3-hour period. Number 14, the Mountaineer, would be followed by first train number 8, second train number 8, train number 4, and finally train number 6. And by the time the last one went up, you could scarcely breathe in the tunnels because of the smoke and the heat. So you can kind of imagine what that would be like. He talks about other things that they would do. They would, the firemen would set, the stoker or whatever, before they would go in the tunnel, they would get a rag or a cloth, soak it in water, cover their face, and lie on the floor while they were going through the tunnels, because, and one guy had a thermometer. In fact, this guy, Floyd, took a thermometer to work with him one day. It was like 110 at the floor of the cab. And he said it could have been hotter because that was as high as the thermometer went. So, so this is not a great scan of a picture out of Morant's book of a T1B, a 210-4 as well. But it's a nice color picture, and it looks better in the book if you want to look at it. Passenger trains, they had these observation cars that they called hay racks. And this is just heading out of field. So again, they were mostly open. In fact, the first cars were all open. And then after a while, they put some windows in the forward section of the car. And then when they would, before they would go into the tunnel, everybody, went into the coach and just kind of protected themselves. And then they came back out again when the train came out of the tunnel. So getting into the photographs of the tunnels themselves, this is the lower tunnel. So we have an upper spiral tunnel, we have a lower spiral tunnel, and each tunnel has an upper portal and a lower portal. So, right? So this is the lower tunnel with actually the lower portal of the lower spiral tunnel. And if you can see up above, just next, like cutting across the base of the smokestack, there's a house up there, not a house, a section, some kind of structure, railroad structure up there on the left. And that's where the grade is. So of the upper line, the line heading to the other tunnel. So the line heads in here, it curves around to the left, comes out over on that side, heads up this way. And the person working the tunnel had to he would stay in that shack, and he would also had the responsibility to walk the tunnel every hour or so. He would have to walk through the tunnel and just make sure everything was clear before another train would go through. So that was quite a job. So 1960s, the same location. And then 1977, same location. This is a rant picture. And there's some interesting things about this picture that I wanted, that's why I included the caption, was that the picture was requested by Pan-Canadian Petroleum, the company. So it says in 1977, a photograph of Pan-Canadian Petroleum tank cars was needed for their annual report, and Nick Morant was asked to do the job. So in September, he shot the tank cars on an eastbound freight, but there were no westbounds for the locomotive shot. So he had to wait, come back each day in the hope of taking the, somebody coming out of the locomotive coming out of the portal on the bottom in the same light conditions so it would match up. Well, he had to wait a week for the same, he came back every day, and it took him a week to get the lighting correct for the other half of the picture. And so this is actually a combination of two photographs. And not only that, but the cars originally carried no company name. So an artist had to add the lettering on the cars up here, Pan-Canadian. They actually had to, paint them in there somehow. Painted out the cars' numbers and then touched up the drawing. So basically, this is a fake picture. So this is picture after the spiral tunnels was built. And I say compare with slide 26 because they were taken similar locations. So this is slide 26, which we saw before. So the previous picture was taken, they think someone was standing around in this neighborhood near this safety spur. So I'm going to go backwards again. So you can tell in the middle there, the road was the original main line. The little valley has been filled in. The new route is on the left. And this is close to Partridge on the left, that train. And so that's kind of the view. You can kind of see it looks rather similar to the other one. I don't know if you need to stop there again, but you can kind of tell it's more or less the same area. This is, you can't get very many good pictures of the upper spiral tunnel. It's just not as accessible. So this is taken, I guess, from the air in some way. But the interesting thing about the upper spiral tunnel is that from the bottom, it actually curves to the left first, and then it curves around the other way and comes out over here. Does that make sense? Okay, so it goes in here, curves around, comes out that way. And freight train, you can tell here, besides the main line at the bottom here, between Yoho and the lower spiral tunnel, in the middle, you can see cars on the Trans-Canada Highway, which was the old grade. And then above that, you see another grade, that's the upper line, the new line, going towards the upper spiral tunnel, which is off to the right. And off to the left is the summit. Okay, this is taken at Yoho. You can tell on the map where that is. It's halfway between the two tunnels about. Floyd Yates, the author, took this photograph and he makes some comments about what was going on in this actual photograph. They were in the second locomotive here. It was Joel. Well, anyway, I don't know why, but they were in the second locomotive. Floyd was firing, and the engineer is someone by the name of Seth Partridge. I'll tell you more about him in a minute. He was going to talk to the engineer up in the lead locomotive and see if he wanted to stay connected all the way to Lake Louise rather than cutting off at Stephen. So, I mean, that's just some operational kind of details and such. But it's interesting just to have kind of the insights of somebody who was actually working the line all that time. This train here is on the, it's entering the lower portal of the upper spiral tunnel, okay? So it's going around to the left. It'll go into the tunnel and come out higher to the left of this picture and heading back in the other direction. And this is really one of the more interesting photographs because you can see so much here. So the last photograph I just had was taken over here, right? So you can the same little structure there. The locomotive is coming around. The portal is there, comes around, comes back this way. So, and also not only that, but over here on the far left, that clearing, that's Cathedral, which is also on the map. And from basically the same location, but a little bit of a different angle, you can see the lower spiral tunnel to the left there, the portal. And then this locomotive here is heading into the upper spiral. Okay, a little bit about Partridge. You can tell on your map here that Partridge, next to it, it also says Mars. Mars was the original name of that particular siding. It was a siding. And Seth Partridge on the right here was back in I think it was 25, was firing a locomotive, and they were at Mars. They were coming down the hill, and he, and I think they might have been stopped, to meet another train going the other direction. And he began to hear distinctive noises of a slide. So there's a lot of slides in this area. And so what he did was he knew that there was going to be a landslide. It was coming. So what he did was he ran down the hill from Partridge or Mars. He ran down to Yoho, down the hill. He got cut up kind of bad. He fell down a few times. He got up, kept on running. He warned the crew that was sleeping, because this happened at night. So they were sleeping in their bunkhouse at Yoho. He woke them all up. He got them out of the bunkhouse just in time, really, before the slide hit. And I think he might have run, I don't know if he went anywhere else as well. I'm not sure if there's anybody down at Cathedral, but he he certainly did that. And this was the slide at Yoho that year. And he was given, a promotion and also given $1,000 back in, which in 1925 was a fair bit of money. So as a award for his bravery by I think it was the Century magazine or something like that.
Landslide, not a snowslide, right?
Yes, right. It's land. Yeah. Yeah, it's rock. That's rock. Yeah. Yeah, it's and it did go all the way down to Cathedral too, this slide. So I don't have copies of the kind of the overall view, but you can kind of see in some of the larger photographs where the slide area is. And it's still, still a slide area. And they do have, I think they on the lower level, they lower line, they do have some sheds, snow sheds, rock sheds, to protect the line. So so this is again near Partridge, looking down the valley. You can tell how rugged it is there. It's just incredible. I've only been through here once, 1975, and it was very cloudy, overcast, kind of drizzly, and low ceiling, so we couldn't really see all the mountains, unfortunately. And basically, this is the end. There were a lot of pictures that I could have included, but only have so much time. And so I hope that this is informative. If you have any questions, any other questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Bob, how many vertical feet in elevation was gained? And what was the linear distance to do that?
Oh, I read that. I can't remember it though. They added, I can get it for you specifically. I think they added something like 5 miles to the line, the length of the line, from what it was before altogether. But they reduced the grade to 2.2%.
Back to 2.2.
Yeah. Yeah, it's 2. Yeah, I probably failed to mention that, but they brought it to within the 2.2%. And they are still operating today. So 1909 till now. They may have made some modifications to the tunnels as far as, for larger equipment and those kinds of things, but any other questions at all?
Thank you.